Almost. Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. I met today's guest when I was a presenter at Rancho La Puerta in Tecate, Mexico. If you haven't been, you've got to put it on your bucket list. He's a regular presenter there. He's also a humorist. He's a medical doctor, and he's here today because you may not know this, but March is National Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. Please welcome to the show, Dr. Joseph Weiss. So nice to see you again.
Hi, AJ. It's a pleasure, and thank you for having me. And as you mentioned, this is an important month. This is National Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. And although most people don't want to think about colorectal cancer, as I'll share with you today, it is important to get screened and think about it because you can save yourself an awful lot of grief with very easy screening measures. And there are also many ways to prevent it from ever occurring. And as your show has demonstrated, healthy eating is really key. And I'll be happy to address that as well. So a lot of ground to cover, important topics, not always on everyone's favorite let's talk about this list, but really important.
Well, I think, the unfortunate death of the wonderful actor Chadwick Boseman has many people that weren't previously thinking about colon cancer and screening actually thinking about it.
They are, and it is a tragedy. The loss of Chadwick was really a loss for all of us, but he unfortunately serves as an important reminder, not only that colorectal cancer occurs, but it does occur in the younger age groups. He was only 39 when he was diagnosed, and it was tragically too late. Colorectal cancer does occur even in the teenage years, in the 20s, 30s. Obviously, it increases in incidence as we get older. But the really bad news is the incidence in the younger population is increasing dramatically, much more so than in those of us who are a bit more mature. So there is a lot to be aware of, that it occurs not only in mature individuals, but young folks as well. And he's also an example in the African-American community. It is more common. There are other ethnic groups and dietary populations that are at risk, and we'll talk about that as well.
Great. And the good news is that people's DNA is not necessarily their destiny when it comes to colorectal cancer.
Absolutely true. It's a great point. In fact, there are so many advances in genetics and genomics. It's really exciting. We can talk about that as well. But your genes are not your destiny. Only about 5% of genes are what are called fully penetrant, where at the moment we can't do anything about it. But that will change too with the advent of CRISPR technology. You may have heard of that. So even though 5% we can't do anything about, 95% of the genetic issues are addressable. They are modifiable. It's a whole new field now called epigenetics. That is the ability to modulate the impact of the genes. So your genes are not your destiny.
That's great. Then people don't necessarily need to feel helpless or hopeless, even if they have a strong family history of colon cancer, like I do in my family. Multiple people have died from colon cancer in my family.
Well, that's a loss. And it is a tragedy that you've lost so many people in your family. But the good news is that even with a genetic risk, even with the hereditary risk, prevention and precautions can make all the difference. You can catch it early where it is very curable. In fact, those who have a higher risk predisposition are encouraged to undergo routine screening, and those who participate are actually at lower risk of dying of colorectal cancer than the general population, which is not aware that it can be screened for. So even having a risk, although that's not something you'd want to have, if you're aware of it, you can reduce the risk to less than that of the average population.
And that's fantastic. And I love that when you gave the talk at Rancho, you talked about there's many ways to be screened. Not everybody has to necessarily have a colonoscopy as the first thing they do.
I'm a little bit of a contrarian. I'm a gastroenterologist, and unfortunately, I do believe in my field, we have really overemphasized colonoscopy as the gold standard for colorectal cancer screening. In the United States, it is the #1 screening test, but it does have risk. It is not the most pleasant of examinations to go through. It is expensive. There is a limit to access. And unfortunately, I think we've overemphasized colonoscopy to the point of scaring people away. There are other non-invasive, safe, quick, inexpensive ways to get screened. And I encourage that before going to colonoscopy. And we can talk about that. We will talk about that. I think it's an important part of the discussion.
Yeah. And it's funny because, of course, anytime you have a medical procedure, there's risk. But I actually had a dear friend that died from a routine colonoscopy. He had just turned 60 and he was trying to avoid it. And his doctor said, "No, Mike, you got to get it. You're 60. He had really no other comorbidities. Whatever they did, something got nicked and he was dead within a week."
I'm so sorry to hear that. It is a tragedy. And what people don't realize, even people in my field, gastroenterologists, don't realize that the risk may be more than it's worth. If you think about it, the goal is to identify colon polyps and colorectal cancers early to save people's lives. When you perform routine screening colonoscopy, which is what we do in the United States, cancer is found in about 1 in 1,000 colonoscopies. What people don't realize is that 2.8, or nearly 3 out of those 1,000 colonoscopies will result in a complication. So is it worth nearly threefold risk of a complication to find that 1 in 1,000 colorectal cancer? I would question that. And I would suggest that we really should be a bit more conservative in terms of recommending colonoscopy, and we'll talk about this. There are easier, safer ways that I would encourage as the first step. Colonoscopy is important, it is valuable, but I would reserve it for when you really need it. I'm not that keen on it being done as a routine, let's screen everybody with a colonoscope. To me, the expense is too high, not just the financial expense to society and the individuals, but the expense in terms of complication rates.
I like that you think differently because a lot of the people I have on the show, like Dr. John McDougall, made a whole career out of thinking differently than their colleagues. And, even if the risk wasn't so high in the expense, there is nothing more unpleasant, in my opinion, than the prep for a colonoscopy.
I would agree with you. In fact, that is the funny thing, if you'll allow me to have a little bit of humor with it. It's not the colonoscopy itself that is really uncomfortable or intimidating. It is the prep. I mean, for those who've had diarrhea, having the colonoscopy prep brings an entirely new meaning to that term. I mean, diarrhea is nothing compared to the tsunami of getting cleared out with the colonoscopy prep. Not a pleasant experience, but memorable. I'll say that much for it.
Yeah, you can't go anywhere that 24. And what they have you drink, that's not very pleasant either.
Oh, it is looking for improvements, and it is getting better. They are working on not only the flavor, but the quantity. More than the flavor, which I was never keen on, was the quantity of drinking 1 gallon of really unpleasant tasting salty solution. It's much lower quantity now. There are much easier ways to get prep. So it is not as bad as it used to be, but the prep is still a challenge for many people. And the prep is really important. People don't realize that if you don't have a really good prep, the colonoscopy is not as accurate. And if you want to go through a colonoscopy, you want it to be as accurate as it can be. You don't want to have to repeat it unnecessarily. So the prep is really important.
Yeah. I think that one of the reasons many people refuse it or delay it is because they hear from people that have had it how unpleasant it is. And
absolutely. No question about it. In fact, I saw a funny little cute sign image that said, if the year 2020 were to be a drink, it will be the colonoscopy prep solution. Teasing that 2020 was a pretty tough year.
Oh, that's hilarious. I remember once watching the Dr. Oz show, and he was talking about the importance of screening, and they were going to not do his colonoscopy on the air and show it, but I remember he couldn't even get through the fast, and I guess he had eaten some lentils, and they found lentils in his GI tract when they were doing the colonoscopy.
You can find all sorts of things that have been lost in the GI tract. So yes, the prep is really key. You don't want to fool around with that. You want to be as spotlessly clean as possible. And it is a challenge, in spite of people being encouraged to be really strenuous in the prep. About 20 to 30% of all colonoscopies are limited because the prep was not as pristine as they really needed. And if there is material in the way, you cannot see that area of the bowel. And if you're talking about colonoscopy, looking for polyps, looking for cancers, if you cannot see 5, 10, 15, 20% of the bowel, you're missing out on the whole purpose of the procedure. So it is important.
So what else can we do? You mentioned that I think you called it the FIT, that was like $1 a test. That is, I mean, almost anybody can afford that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
When I heard you speak, you mentioned a test, the FIT, I think you called it.
Yes, yes, thank you, thank you. Well, there are a number of other tests that one can do. I would suggest that the first test one should do is called an FIT test, which stands for fecal, which is stool, poop, immunochemical test. It is a test looking for hidden traces of blood in the stool, in the feces. Bleeding is a hallmark of polyps and cancers, but many different causes of bleeding. So even if the FIT test were positive and found a trace of blood coming from the bowel, it's not necessarily, in fact, it's only in the minority of instances that it really is a cancer. So the FIT test is simple, it's relatively inexpensive, it's rapid, it's very easy to do. It's done at home. You don't have to travel anywhere. There's no COVID exposure, and it's very effective. Its yield is the same as colonoscopy. 1 in 1,000 cancers will be identified in the FIT test. So let me rephrase that. I misstated that. 1 in 1,000 tests of the FIT test will identify a colorectal cancer. So for every 1,000 tests done, somebody's life is saved by being caught hopefully early. Besides the FIT, there is a newer test now. It's called the multi-target stool DNA test. The brand name is Cologuard. It includes an FIT within the test, and it has additional markers looking at genetic material, DNA. Again, it's a stool test. Not everyone is too keen about shipping stool specimens through the mail, but it is non-invasive. It's really easy to do. You get the report back about a week or so later. If it's positive, then you do need a colonoscopy. If it's negative, you can breathe a sigh of relief. With about 98% accuracy, it has excluded colorectal cancer. It suggested that the FIT test be done annually. The Cologuard test is suggested every 3 years. The Cologuard does include a FIT within it. So it's a FIT test and a DNA test. And there are other ways besides those two. There's a blood test that's available now, and advances are coming rapidly, even more accurate, faster, more specific blood tests will be coming, not just for colon cancers, but for colon polyps. There is also what's called a capsule colonoscopy, which is now available. It's not quite to the level of accuracy that we would want, but it is making quick progress. And that, again, is non-invasive or minimally invasive. You swallow a capsule, which is this amazing technology. The capsule is basically a video camera. There was a movie decades ago, Fantastic Voyage, about traveling through the human body. We've come from science fiction to reality here. So the capsule colonoscopy is here. The capsule endoscopy is used commonly to look at the upper GI tract. The colon is available, and it is advancing in technology. There is also what is called CT colonography, or virtual colonoscopy, using a CT or CAT scan, which stands for computerized axial tomography. I'm trying to impress the audience that I've got a couple of initials that I can explain with full names. That's another approach. There are a variety of ways to get screened. What I would like to suggest to the audience is there are options. Talk with your healthcare provider about which option is best for you. There are advantages and disadvantages to each of them. There are different ways, different approaches. You have different risk factors, and those can be calculated and addressed, and people can offer you guidance. But the most important thing is to trust yourself, trust your own gut, excuse the play on words, in terms of the best approach for you, and also realize that the best screening test is the one that gets done. If you are intimidated and your doctor or other healthcare provider is trying to encourage you to have a colonoscopy, but you're not going to do it, well, that's not the screening test for you. There are other options. By all means, though, do get screened. You really can save your own life and the lives of others by encouraging them to do that.
That is the most brilliant thing. The best colorectal cancer screening test is the one the person will actually do. Because it doesn't matter if the colonoscopy is the gold standard if they won't do it. So just because you're not going to do that, do something. And like you said, the FIT, you said it was like $1 a test. Could a person get it themselves, or does everything have to be ordered by their doctor?
By the way, I also want to give credit to the person who came up with that phrase, the best test is the one that gets done. It's Dr. Sidney Winauer, who's one of the pioneers in gastroenterology. And the cost is variable, much like the cost of virtually everything we have in our US economy is quite variable. You can find differences in pricing. If you wanted to go for the more expensive FIT test, you go to a laboratory, and there are a couple of commercial labs that are nationwide now. The cost there for a FIT test is about $100 to $120. They use a device which is called a quantitative hemoglobin analyzer. It is more sensitive. It is a more accurate FIT test. There are also the home-based FIT tests that you can get on Amazon. They're available in pharmacies. They run around $10 to $25. They are, again, accurate, but not quite as accurate as the commercial laboratory FIT test. There are other tests which enterprise has moved forward and said, rather than having to find a small specimen to put on this little testing kit, just throw this piece of testing paper into the toilet bowl after you have a bowel movement. If it changes color, it's a FIT test. Not quite as sensitive, but pretty good. And again, it's hands-free, if you would, no dealing with poop. So there's an advantage to that. When I mentioned the cost can be down to $1 a test, that's the actual cost of the material to run the test. If you get it at wholesale, and there are large organizations that encourage the FIT test for their employees or members, their cost of a test is about $3 to $5 per test. And again, you can get it down to $1. And Costco hasn't jumped on the bandwagon for FIT tests yet, but I think they should. So I think that it will be great to get the cost down. But what I'm getting at is this is really cheap life insurance. If you think about it, if you can protect yourself from a really unpleasant way to go, and you can extend your lifespan by, for some people, they extend their lifespan by 20, 30, 40, 50 years by catching it early. Overall, the average population will gain about 2 years of life with a test that costs $2 or $3 a year. I mean, talk about getting a cup of coffee. Protect yourself, please. It's easy to do. So there are lots of ways to get screened, so many different options. There's no reason not to get screened. There's another great saying, and I didn't come up with it, but I like it. It says, don't die of embarrassment. Just because you're concerned it's your bowel or it's poop or whatever, get over it. And we have pets, we have kids, we have diapers for adults. It's not a big deal. This is normal human physiology. It's normal animal physiology. Everybody goes. But if you can use that just 1 to 2 minutes, is all the time it takes for the test. And if you can save years of your life, and really tragic grief if you don't, it's worth it. By the way, for those who are still concerned, well, again, if you end up getting colon cancer and having surgery or a colostomy bag, if you think about it, you're going to be dealing with a lot more poop issues then. The 60-second test is really nothing.
Yeah. At what age, Dr. Weiss, do you recommend people get screened, or does it depend on their family history and other risk factors?
It really does depend on family history and risk factors. Overall, the recommendations are to start screening. It used to be to start screening at age 50. You may have heard just recently, it made the news, that a number of organizations have suggested that the age be reduced to age 45. It's been reduced to age 45 for the African American community for a couple of years because they're at higher risk and at younger age populations. So the general recommendation now is to begin at age 45. But I'm a contrarian. And the reason I want to bring that up is the reason they say age 45 is they're using population-based, cost-effective analysis. Somebody is calculating what is it worth to Medicare or the government or to private insurance companies to save a life. Believe it or not, they do have dollar figures as to what it's worth to save a life a human's life. And when the age is dropped, you're talking about a sizable increase in the population that is advised to get screened. So the cost goes up dramatically as you lower the age to start screening. It goes up for a population. But for the individual, I look at it differently. I look at it from an individual perspective. Do I want to tell a 42-year-old, we're going to take a risk that you're going to die at age 42 of colorectal cancer because we wanted to save some dollars and say, let's wait until age 45. What I would suggest for the individual, if it's worth saving your life at age 35 or age 30, although colon cancer is not quite as common as it is in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it still does occur. And for a couple dollars, if you can just avoid having to worry about that, to me, that's a bargain. Again, I use the phrase, I consider it extraordinarily cheap life insurance, but not just life insurance where you're paying a premium and somebody else gets the benefits after you pass away. This is life insurance where you're protecting your own life, your own longevity. So I would start earlier. And what I would suggest as well, because we do know that there are genetic factors involved. Genomics has moved so quickly now with the advances in the analysis. You can sequence genes for a fraction of the cost of what it cost us a few years ago. There are panels available commercially. And again, you can go on the internet and find them. There are several companies that offer genetic panels to screen for colorectal cancer, ovarian cancer, breast cancer. And these panels, you can get 20 or 30 different genetic tests performed for about $100. You do it just once in your life. Your genes don't change. They're the same throughout your lifespan. If you have a positive test and it identifies a risk, by the way, about 8% of people who go through genetic profiling will find that they do have a risk for something. Again, this is not your destiny. Knowing about it, you can be proactive. You can modify the risk significantly, whether it's diet, tobacco, alcohol, exercise, so many things you can do. So I encourage people to get screened. Now, if you do happen to have a positive genetic risk for colorectal cancer, start screening at age 20. Some people even say in the teenage years, and tragically and unfortunately, I have seen kids in their late teenage years with end-stage colorectal cancer, and it is a horrible, devastating tragedy. But again, with genetic testing, the vast majority of these can be identified earlier. By the way, there is a hereditary syndrome named Lynch syndrome, named after Dr. Henry Lynch, not after a lynching. But unfortunately, these folks are at very high risk of colorectal cancer. And they start colonoscopy often in their teenage years because of that. This is not all that rare, and the genetic screening profiles will identify people with Lynch syndrome. And again, rather than waiting until age 45 and coming in with a colon cancer and being told you have Lynch syndrome, I think it's much better to spend $100 as a teenager, get the genetic profiling. If you have it, hopefully avoiding tragic consequences, changing your diet, getting screened regularly can make all the difference.
So, Dr. Weiss, when you guys find a polyp there, how long has it been growing, and does it always turn to cancer if it's not removed?
It's a great question. Now, there are different types of polyps. A polyp is an excess growth of tissue lining the colon, and there are different types of colon polyps. The more common type of colon polyp that leads to cancer is called a villus polyp or an adenomatous polyp. Those polyps have a risk, particularly when they get to be about 1 centimeter in size, which is about a half an inch in size. At that point, probably 2 to 5% will develop cancer at that early stage, but the cancer is still within the polyp. It has not spread. It takes, on average, most people believe, about 10 years for a polyp to grow to that size. So it's probably been there for some time. Now, there are other types of polyps which are more rapid growing. There are other varieties of polyps that occur, and unfortunately for women, these types of polyps occur more often in women, and they occur more often in what's called the proximal colon, that is higher up in the bowel. further away from the rectum, a more difficult area to reach and examine. So women are at risk in a different way than men are. So when it comes to polyps, again, different varieties, different sizes. The larger the polyp, the greater the risk. But overall, it's only a fraction of the polyps that become cancerous. We're talking less than 10%. In some instances, polyps do not become cancerous at all. There are smaller polyps known as hyperplastic polyps, where that is believed to be the case, where the risk of cancer is a fraction of 1%. So it, again, depends on the pathology, the nature of the polyp, the size of the polyp, location of the polyp can make a difference as well. And some of the more exciting advances are that there are ways to prevent polyp formation. There are also ways to encourage the regression of polyps. That is, the polyp is able to become smaller and hopefully disappear entirely with various approaches. So there are advances coming along, and we are learning more and more about what underlies colorectal cancer and polyps, and diet plays a very important part.
People are asking the genetic testing that you were talking about. Where does one get that? Do they need to see a certain type of physician to have that test ordered?
No, you can order it directly from the companies. And again, I don't want to be mentioning commercial companies. I'm not trying to promote any one company. There are several that are out there. If you look for genetic profile for colorectal cancer, and I would encourage people to consider genetic profiles, not just for colorectal cancer. There are general cancer genetic profiles. I would encourage them to do that. Ovarian cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer. You probably have heard of the BRCA gene, which Angelina Jolie made more popular by being so open about her own health issues, and I have to give her credit for doing so. The BRCA gene is an important genetic marker. There is an interesting story behind the BRCA gene, which I don't think is very pleasant. The company that first identified it patented it. It's a company in Utah that patented the BRCA gene, and they required people to pay them before they would give them the results of the BRCA analysis, even if it wasn't done by their company, even if other companies were doing genetic analyses. It went to the Supreme Court just a few years ago. The Supreme Court thankfully threw out their patent on a human gene. So now you can get the BRCA gene, and where they had been charging $4,000 to find out whether you had this gene or not, you can get it for less than $100. So go online, search for genetic screening panels, and there are a variety of companies that offer them. Look at the reviews. There are some that are very credible, others that I'm not so sure about. So again, it's an open marketplace, but it is becoming popular, and it does make absolute sense. We're entering a new era in medicine, which is called personalized precision medicine. And genomics is at the forefront. And this is just one aspect where we are moving so quickly into this new world, if you will. And it is exciting.
That's fantastic. And I'm really excited about the capsule colonoscopy, because that I would do. That sounds really fun.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say it is fun, because you do have to swallow a horse pill. It's still a fairly sizable capsule, but it is doable. It's really not a big deal. Once it's swallowed, the camera has a timer. It turns on. It takes between 40 to 60 images per second. It has a battery life that will get you all the way through the bowel. It's taking images. It has a camera at both ends of the capsule. The person who has to interpret it is looking at a video movie. It's like being on a roller coaster, because the capsule is spinning and turning all over. This is not for the faint of heart to watch, but it does have a remarkable ability to see areas of the bowel that we could not see before, particularly the small bowel. When it comes to the colon, it's very good. It's not perfect. It's getting close. Colonoscopy is thought to have a effect. If you hear from the experts, we will tell you as a gastroenterologist, oh, we're 95 to 99% accurate. No, we're not. We're lower than that. Unfortunately, significantly lower than that. Capsule colonoscopy right now is about 65% accurate. Some people would say it's 80% accurate, but it does have some advantages over colonoscopy. It's easier, it's less invasive. The prep is unfortunately the same. You still have to have the bowel cleared, but the capsule is coming. If you can, I would say wait just a few more years. The capsule will be further along, and I think it will be giving colonoscopy a run for its money.
Right. The thing is, like you mentioned, the prep is still going to be as stringent.
Well, the prep is challenging, but I did mention the prep is improving. The quantity is reduced. The taste is better. By the way, there is another approach for the prep. And for those who have heard about colonics as a health measure, some controversy to that. I'm open-minded about it. Colonics have been around for thousands of years. Some people have started to use colonics as a way to prepare for a colonoscopy. Rather than drinking a gallon of fluid and flushing the system from above, they're using colonics to clear the colon, and they've had very good results with it. So it's another approach, another alternative, and there are some commercial ventures now offering colonics. And by the way, colon hydrotherapy is a profession, and there are excellent technicians who offer that for various reasons. One can consider that as another alternative to prepare for a colonoscopy. I would talk to your colonoscopist, make sure that they are agreeable, that will be acceptable. But for me, as a gastroenterologist and as a colonoscopist, I would say it's absolutely acceptable. It's perfectly acceptable as an alternative approach, and I think it has some advantages to it as well.
Wow. Well, thank you for having an open mind and providing different options. I believe you prepared a few slides. Would you like to screen share them with our audience?
Only if you really want to see them. I have a number of slides, but yes, there's a lot of information I love to share with folks. And sometimes the images can say a lot more than I can say with words. But I want to be respectful of your time too. So if I'm offering you too much information, just let me know. I'll be happy to tone it down. So let's see. Can you see that slide now? Is that open? Can you see?
Perfect. Colon cancer awareness, top tips to prevent and detect.
Okay, well, that's me, and I do have some initials after my name, but I'll have to share with you when I gave my first program at Rancho La Puerta, the talk I was asked to give was all about intestinal gas. And I had a program called To Err is Human, spelled A-I-R. And my spouse, Nancy, who was with me at Rancho La Puerta, decided, what do you have all those initials after your name for? And I said, people can be impressed. It doesn't make a difference to me, but just let them know that I do have some credibility if I'm talking about intestinal gas. Well, she switched my title slide. She added the initials F-A-R-T after my name for my title slide at the ranch, but I thought, okay, I can handle that. I'm open-minded about it. So let's go through things. Oh, by the way, this is a cartoonist friend of mine, Dan Ferraro, who has a cartoon strip, Bizarro. He created this cartoon. My first name is Joe. I'm a gastroenterologist, so I am G.I. Joe. That's my nickname in the field. And it says we wanted the Army guy, not the gastroenterologist. So a quick pre-test for everybody. Colorectal cancer is the second leading cancer killer. True or false? Tragically, that is true. Both men and women get colorectal cancer. Yes, we both do it at nearly the same rates. Colorectal cancer often starts with no symptoms. Yes, rarely do you have symptoms. More often than not, it's silent internal bleeding. And screening helps prevent colorectal cancer. Absolutely, yes. So these are some important points. Just want to start off with a brief quiz. This is what the colon looks like. It's also known as the large intestine, the lower portion of the bowel. It has different segments. You don't need to know the names, but it does loop around the bowel. It does have about 4.5 to 5 feet of length. It ends in the rectum, and the exit is the anus. The colon's purpose is to remove water from the fecal material as it goes through the digestive tract. It preserves water so you don't have to be drinking all day long. Of the common cancers between men and women, colorectal cancer is the number 3 cancer. So lung cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer in men, but colorectal cancer is a common one. There are several risk factors. And by the way, March is Colon Cancer Awareness Month. So thank you for having me this month. And the risk factors include age. The slide says begin regular screening at age 50. They just reduced that to age 45. And as I mentioned, I would suggest for the FIT test, because it's so inexpensive, consider it a cheap form of life insurance, and I would begin earlier. I would suggest age 35, even age 30 is reasonable. Doing the genetic screening, if you have a genetic risk, I would start at age 20 with the FIT test. Colonoscopy, I would reserve only if the FIT test is positive. If you have a family history of colon cancer or colon polyps or the inherited genetic mutations we mentioned, racial and ethnic backgrounds, African Americans are at higher risk, Native Americans, the folks who are in the Alaskan Eskimo region, as well as in the American Indian tribes, are at higher risk. People of Jewish ancestry are at higher risk. Type 2 diabetes is at higher risk. Those who have inflammatory bowel disease, such as Crohn's disease, and in particular, ulcerative colitis, are at higher risk. Obesity is a risk factor. Now, it's amazing, in the United States, 75% of our population is either overweight or obese. That's become the new normal, but we have just increased our risk of colorectal cancer. In fact, obesity may be the reason that colorectal cancer is increasing so much in the younger population, because it has become an epidemic. Tobacco is related to colon cancer. Alcohol is related to colon cancer. The slide says heavy alcohol consumption. The more you drink, the greater your risk. Alcohol is a carcinogen. Even small amounts of alcohol raise your risk. They raise it by small amounts, but it is an increase. The warning signs: look for changes in your bowel habits, any blood in the stool, abdominal discomfort, unexplained fatigue, which could be from anemia, loss of appetite, weight loss, pelvic pain, particularly for women if they have abdominal distension, bloating. Be careful. Not only colon cancer, but ovarian cancer can also have that sign or symptom. Colon cancers begin as a polyp, as we had mentioned earlier. It takes just a few cells to begin. It takes about 10 years to grow to a size where there is a real concern about cancer developing. So we have about 10 years to screen and find polyps before it becomes a cancer. Excuse me. I've given several programs over the last few days, so I think my voice is about to wear out, but I'm going to keep trying to go through here if we can. This is the appearance of what it looks like at colonoscopy. The upper left-hand corner is a very small polyp on a fold. You can barely see it. B, you can see more clearly, and the lower image more clearly yet. The bottom left image is the way polyps more commonly appear in women. And you might notice it's more difficult to see than the bottom right, which is the way it more commonly appears in men. The bottom left, it's got a catchy name, is called a sessile serrated hyperplastic polyp. The one to the right is an adenomatous polyp. Again, they have different risks of cancers. And unfortunately for women, it's not only harder to see the polyp in the lower left, it's more likely to be in the proximal higher bowel, higher to reach, and it unfortunately has a higher risk of becoming cancerous. This is what a cancer looks like when it's moved on, and unfortunately, this is a nasty disease. It doesn't give you much time. If you catch it early, you can save a life. If you catch it late, it's just really an unpleasant story. Most cancers begin in the lower bowel, except in women, where it occurs more often in the upper bowel. Again, symptoms, more often than not, there are no symptoms. But if you do have symptoms, nausea, fatigue, weight loss, weakness, constipation, dark stools, black stools, maroon blood, dark blood. By the way, the brighter the blood color, if you see blood in the toilet bowl or on the stool, the better. The more likely it is coming from hemorrhoids or something that is not a cancer. Darker blood is more worrisome. It means it's coming from higher in the bowel, and that is not a hemorrhoid. Diarrhea, rectal bleeding, pain with bowel movements. Now, the slide says 47%, nearly half of colorectal cancers can be prevented. This slide is not as accurate as I would like it to be, because what it's not taking into account is that the vast majority of cancers begin as polyps. Polyps can be identified early and removed. So I would suggest that the number of cancers that can be prevented is actually much higher than 47%. I think it's probably around 90% plus. So on the left side of the slide, it says stay a healthy weight throughout life. Again, obesity is a concern. Exercise activity protects you, so move more in any way every day. Fiber is thought to be protective, and fiber-rich foods are helpful. Red meat is a risk factor. Avoiding red meat, processed meats is important. Don't drink alcohol, or at least limit the amount you drink. Now, there is some good news, and that is the death rate from cancer, and not just colorectal cancer, from all cancers, has decreased substantially. Over the last few decades, it's gone down 25%. This is a real advance. We are making progress, but we have not won the war on cancer. It still is an issue. And again, colorectal cancer is the second leading cause of death in the United States. Yet 1 in 3, 1/3 of the at-risk population does not go through any screening whatsoever. 2/3 of those who come down with colon cancer do not have a family history of colon cancer. Early diagnosis is key. If it's found early at stage 1, it has a 94% survival rate. If you wait until stage 4, it has only an 11% survival rate. Chadwick Boseman was found at a stage 3. And unfortunately, tragically, he was not in the majority who survived when it was found at that stage. For him, it was too late. And again, it's at greater risk in African Americans. So number 2 leading cause of cancer, that is a big number. Colorectal cancer should be talked about. We should not be hiding and not discussing it. And again, I like that statement. Don't die of embarrassment. There's nothing embarrassing about the bowel. 90% of cases occur in people age 50 or older. That means 10% of cases occur in those younger than age 50. How many people get colorectal cancer in the US? About 150,000 per year. Nearly 50,000 deaths every year. So 10% of that number is under age 50. That is not a small number. If you do have a family history, it can even be a half brother, half sister, aunt, uncle, your risk is increased by 2 to 3 times. There are over 1 million colon cancer survivors in the United States. The overall risk is about 4 to 5%, about 1 in 20. So you may think, well, 95%, I'm in the clear. That's true. And if you want to go to Las Vegas, those are pretty good odds. But when you're gambling your life, that 5% risk to me is much too high when it's so easy to screen for it and prevent it. If you were born in the 90s, great news, you're younger than I am. But unfortunately for you, you're at higher risk for colon cancer. It is increasing in the younger population, and rectal cancer is increasing even faster than colon cancer. 2 thoughts behind it. One is that population is getting more overweight and obese. That is a risk factor. Tobacco and alcohol is also an issue, but also sedentary lifestyle. People are more inactive than they should be. Age 45 is the new age now. So start screening younger. Again, I would encourage an even younger age group. Alcohol, if you can avoid it or reduce it, you're better off. Alcohol is considered a carcinogen, and not just for colorectal cancer. The American Cancer Society suggests that men should have no more than 2 drinks a day, women 1 drink a day. And they don't mean to be discriminatory. It has to do with body weight. Men seem to be a bit larger, heavier, more of a volume than the gals, so you have to consume less alcohol. And alcohol increases your risk not only of colorectal cancer, but cancer of the mouth, pharynx, larynx, the vocal cords, the esophagus, breast, colorectal cancer, as I've mentioned, stomach, and liver. So please consider reducing your intake of alcohol. Tobacco is also associated with colorectal cancer, as it is with a number of other cancers, including the esophagus, larynx, blood cancers, lungs, obviously, liver, kidney, stomach, pancreas, uterus, urinary bladder, and the colon, as we've mentioned. So this image, I think, says a lot about tobacco smoke. Tobacco is a risk. There is a cancer risk with tobacco. There is no safe amount. And no matter what form you use the tobacco, even chewing tobacco has a risk. Weight is a big issue. If you are overweight or obese, you're at higher risk. The numbers across the US are stunning. 75% of Americans are overweight or obese. That is a staggering number. And again, there is a strong link between physical activity, exercise as well. So if you have physical activity, you can decrease your risk of breast cancer, colorectal cancer, endometrial cancer, body fat, obesity, overweight. The risk is for the colorectal cancer, but as well endometrial, pancreatic, kidney, gallbladder, breast, and esophagus. This is the SAD diet, the standard American diet. This is our cheeseburger. Well, it may look appealing to some if you're used to that, but for those who have been on a plant-based diet or are used to healthier eating, this is no longer appealing. This is actually a pretty unattractive picture. This is not something that I would be really interested in consuming. What I see is the risk of disease and illness. So this is sad. I like this caption. It's from Wendell Berry. People are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and are treated by the health industry, which pays no attention to food. It's embarrassing to me that going through 4 years of medical school and years of postgraduate training, nutrition was not an emphasis. We don't get enough to learn about nutrition in medical school. So it's not the physicians who are really paying the most attention. I would encourage people to read and listen to dietitians, nutritionists, and physicians who are advocates for healthy eating, because eating, the diet, is playing a key role. And again, when it comes to food, how we prepare it is also important. The open flames, the grilling, leads to conversion of products to what are called carcinogens, cancer-forming products. Smoking leads to conversion to carcinogens. There are cancer prevention tips in your kitchen. Eat food, but not too much, don't overdo it, and stick with the plant-based diet. Avoid processed foods. Avoid adding sugar. Meat in moderation, if at all. Limit alcohol intake, eating anti-inflammatory foods, finding your healthy weight. When it comes to the ingredients in food that you may have heard about that may be protective, antioxidants, folic acid or folate, vitamin D, calcium, fiber, omega-3, whole grains. Coffee has benefits when it comes to colorectal cancer, reducing the risk. What I want to comment is, yes, there are foods that are associated with benefits and reduced risk of colorectal cancer. But I want to zoom in on this in just a moment. First, just want to comment, the antioxidants make a lot of sense. So if you're going to use an antioxidant, the colorful, richly colored, deeply colored fruits and vegetables are your best source. And we have a variety to choose from. It really is, I think, a very attractive palette of colors to look at, and they are tasty and they are healthy. By the way, just overall health and longevity. Vegetarians live longer. Vegans live even longer than the regular vegetarians. Now, pesco-vegetarians live the longest, but you have to be careful. If you're going to consume seafood, and there is an advantage to it, you want to make sure that it's not tainted by mercury or other toxins. So again, you have to be careful where you get your food. Now, when I've given programs that people say, well, you're encouraging a vegetarian cuisine or a pesco-vegetarian cuisine, where am I going to get my protein? I need protein. I use this next image to answer the question. You see all these muscle-bound animals? They are massive and muscle-bound. They are all vegetarians. They're herbivores. There is plenty of protein in the plant world. Now, AJ, I know you're not too thrilled about eggs, and I'm going to be open-minded about eggs. I'm going to say to folks, well, eggs are interesting, but they have been controversial, and they have been controversial for decades. Are eggs good for you, or egg yolks in particular? What about cholesterol levels? I just want to share something interesting with you. Oh, here's a cartoon. Good news, your cholesterol has stayed the same, but the research findings have changed. Doesn't that happen often in medicine, where we change what we're going to tell people? So it used to be egg yolks were good, bad, back and forth. the understanding now is it's not the food. It has to do with the microbes that live within our gut. The microbial life forms, such as bacteria, viruses, protozoans, yeast, fungi, archaea, prions. These microbes form what's called the gut microbiome. It's the microbes that live within the gut. They process and help us digest and absorb the foods. It's the microbes who convert the egg yolk choline into another product called TMA, trimethylamine. The liver metabolizes it to trimethylamine oxide. It oxidizes the TMA. Trimethylamine oxide, TMAO, induces atherosclerosis. It leads to heart disease. The reason the science studies could never answer the question if egg yolks were good for you or bad for you is they weren't looking at the microbes. And populations have different microbes. They would do one study that said egg yolks are bad for you. Those are the people who had the microbes that converted to TMAO, which caused heart disease. Those who didn't have the microbes didn't have that problem. The egg yolks looked to be okay. So we're finding out that it's much more complicated than just the foods themselves. Remember the earlier slides where I was suggesting vitamin D and calcium and folate, folic acid may protect people from colorectal cancer? Now we don't know if it's those products within the foods themselves or it's the influence they have on the gut microbiome that is really the source of the benefit. So if you look at the gut, there is about 2 to 5 pounds of gut microbiome within everyone. And that microbiome is changing a lot about medicine. It's about 100 trillion organisms. They are outnumbering human cells by about 10 to 1. Some people think that number is inflated a bit, but at least 3 to 1, but perhaps as many as 10 to 1. And people's guts, the gut microbiome, influences health, wellness, and disease across the board. They have found that Alzheimer's, Parkinson's are related to the gut microbiome and may be caused by the gut microbiome. The same for arthritis, cancers, heart disease, lung disease, kidney disease. The microbiome is really changing health. When you look at the diet, they have found that dietary changes will change the gut microbiome. The foods you eat will change the microbes that reside within the gut. The gut microbiome is now considered the most recent human organ system to be discovered and identified. What's unique about it is it's not human. These are alien life forms living within us, but they are part of us. They produce metabolites, and these metabolites have an impact. When they measured metabolites circulating in human blood by using genomic sequencing, they were able to identify that 30% of all of these chemicals floating around in the human blood came from the gut microbiome. They were generated, manufactured by the gut microbes, then absorbed into the body and circulating in the blood. Now, they have an effect on inflammation, blood vessel narrowing, the atherosclerosis. They can lead to mood disorders. Many people know that their mood is related to it. It's now believed that autism is related to the gut microbiome. We do know that the microorganisms play a role in colorectal cancer. It is believed that the microbes may be playing a very important role. But when it comes to the brain, the gut microbiome is playing an extremely important role when it comes to cerebral vascular disease, migraine, anxiety, depression, autism, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Lou Gehrig disease, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. All of these are now associated with the gut microbiome and the brain-gut axis. So one of the healthiest vegetables to eat would be the cruciferous vegetables. And these listed are the non-starchy cruciferous vegetables. By the way, cruciferous means cross-shaped. It's the cross-shaped flower. It's not the vegetable itself that has the cross shape. It's only the flower that has the cross shape. But I want to share with you that the cruciferous vegetables have a cancer-protecting property. They are known to reduce the risk of a variety of cancers because of a compound that is found in cruciferous vegetables. But nature is fascinating. The Cruciferous vegetables do not generate this compound to benefit humans. They don't really care if humans are protected from cancer or not. The vegetable wants to protect itself. That's what its goal in life is. So it has two products within the cell of each cell of the cruciferous vegetable. It's a storage cell that contains a chemical compound known as glucosinolate. It also has a separate cell, and they are kept separate for a reason, holding an enzyme called myrosinase. When the cells are disrupted or broken, when something chews on the leaf or the stem of the plant, the cell ruptures. The chemical glucosinolate is now exposed to the enzyme myrosinase. When the two come together, there's a chemical conversion to what are called isothiocyanates. These products are what kill the caterpillar or the pathogen that is irritating or destroying the cruciferous vegetable. This is its defense mechanism. The cruciferous vegetable has this chemical and the myrosinase kept separately because when it's combined, that chemical, the isothiocyanate, is toxic not only to the caterpillar, but to the cauliflower or broccoli plant itself. So it doesn't want them coming together. It's only when the insect chews and crushes the cell that the two chemicals are released, combined, and then become the isothiocyanate. That kills the caterpillar. It's no longer going to be a pathogen. That poison for the caterpillar happens to be a medicine for humans. It's what protects us from cancer. So one man's poison, another man's medicine. In this instance, it's the caterpillar's poison generated by the cruciferous vegetables that protects us from cancer. The takeaway point here is the myrosinase storage cell. The myrosinase enzyme is heat sensitive. When you cook broccoli or cauliflower, you destroy the myrosinase. So when you eat cooked broccoli, cauliflower, or cruciferous vegetables, yes, you're crushing the cells, you're releasing the glucosinolate, but there's no longer any myrosinase to bring it to the active compound that protects you from cancer. So if you're eating cruciferous vegetables to protect your health, which is what I would encourage you to do, you have to either have a chew of raw cruciferous vegetables that has not been cooked, so it still has the myrosinase activity, or use some mustard powder or another source of myrosinase to activate it. I hope this is too complex for folks, but I want to share with you that cooking, the way you prepare foods, can either destroy or amplify the benefits of the foods. And this is one case where it really is important to know how you are preparing the foods. So what you can do is you can puree or put the food in a blender, crunch up the cells before you start cooking it. Again, it doesn't take long for the myrosinase to activate the glucosinolate to the isothiocyanates. So again, it is just an important point to keep in mind that the health benefits may be lost in the cooking preparation of certain foods. When it comes to prebiotics and probiotics, for those who've heard the terms, probiotics are simply organisms that can reside in the human gut for us that will provide benefit. And prebiotics are the foods that the microbes need to survive. Prebiotics are basically fiber. So they've repackaged fiber, which used to be at a lower price, put a new label on it, prebiotics, and raised the price because it's become a bit of a fad to have prebiotics and probiotics. And prebiotics are fine, they're good for you. But you can get the same prebiotic benefit from eating high fiber containing foods. So fiber is the key for prebiotics. Probiotics, again, has become a fad. Be careful. There are commercial companies now manufacturing probiotic products, and it is an enormous business. It's a $50 billion a year marketplace and growing. But there's an issue. I would encourage you to think of probiotics the way you think, hopefully think, of antibiotics. They are and have benefits, they have potential harm as well. Probiotics crowd out other microbes. By taking probiotics, particularly the commercial brands, which I am not in favor of, and here's the reason why. There are thousands of different species of microbes that live in the gut. We are just beginning to understand which ones are really important for human health and which ones might be contributing to disease. We really don't have the full answer. We won't for several years. When you take and look at populations as a population level, it's believed that the greater the diversity of your microbiome, the healthier you are. So the encouragement at the moment, and again, I use the term belief carefully. I make a distinction between belief and truth and knowledge. We all have beliefs. I like beliefs. I think people should have beliefs. But many of us have found that some things we've believed in have been proven wrong over the years. So whether it's Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or whatever our belief might be, not all beliefs come true. So keep an open mind. The belief is that the greater the diversity of your microbiome, the better. That has not been proven. But if you accept that belief, and there is evidence to support it, the last thing you would want to do is to reduce the diversity. When you're taking a commercial probiotic, they have 1 or 2 microbes, and some of the more interesting ones have 5 or 6 microbes. And you're taking those in millions of colony-forming units, sometimes billions. Sometimes people take it several times a day, day in, day out. And what you're doing is you're converting the diversity of your microbiome into uniformity, into monotony. You're crowding out the other diverse microbes with billions and billions of the same probiotics over and over again. What you're doing is you're killing off the diversity of your microbiome. The same thing happens when you take an antibiotic, and we do know that antibiotics are harmful to the microbiome. The effect of taking a course of antibiotics, even a brief course, can be measured up to 2 years later by looking at the gut microbiome. So what I would suggest is we don't know enough about probiotics to be taking the commercial products where they're limited in the number of microbes. And we really don't know what we're doing with those. I would suggest sticking with the probiotic-rich foods, those that are fermented, gut-healthy foods, broccoli, cruciferous vegetables, bananas, beans, artichokes, blueberries, polenta, kimchi, sauerkraut, tempeh. Go to the refrigerated food section. Also, go to the farmers markets. Most of the healthy microbes are found in the soil. By getting microbe-rich organic foods that come from a farmer's market, you're doing better. Be careful about organic foods. Not all organic foods are really better. There are organic farms which get their fertilizer in the form of manure, and they get it from commercial cattle ranches because the commercial cattle ranches have millions of pounds of manure they want to get rid of, and they offer it for free. And if you put that material on an organic farm, it's still considered organic. The US Department of Agriculture says that's organic, you're using manure. But here's the take-home message. In American food production, cattle ranches feed the cattle lots antibiotics, hormones. They're exposed to herbicides, pesticides. It is tainted, much like the meat is tainted with these chemicals. The manure is tainted. You put tainted manure on an organic farm, that is tainted organic produce, still labeled tainted. So I don't want to scare you, but I would suggest talking to the organic farmers at your farmer's market, or if you go to a store, ask them, where do these organic farms get their manure from? If they don't know the answer, ask them to write to the companies to try to encourage them. There is an emphasis trying to encourage organic farms to be a bit more sensitive about really protecting the public, because the public doesn't know. And the USDA has really not gotten on top of that because there's a big lobby for organic foods. And I like the concept of organic, but I also like the idea of farmers markets and knowing what you're eating. I'd like to go back 2,500 years to Hippocrates. Our food should be our medicine should be our food. Wise words of wisdom. Hasn't changed in 2,500 years. When it comes to exercise, I like cartoons. What fits your busy schedule better? Exercising 1 hour a day or being dead 24 hours a day. Activity is important. And again, when it comes to colorectal cancer, there's so much you can do to avoid it. Please protect yourself and do get screened. A take-home point is sometimes it's not just the food and exercise. You can do other things that make a big difference. On this slide, I put down that aspirin can save lives. But I want to be careful, and I like to always share both sides of the story. Aspirin can also be a risk. For some people, aspirin is not a good idea. It could lead to a greater risk of bleeding. So not everyone should be on aspirin. Talk to your healthcare provider. But here's the point I want to make about colorectal cancer. We do know that aspirin, taking even a baby aspirin a day, reduces your risk of colorectal cancer by 50%. That's a staggering number. Now, we've also known for some years that colon polyps can be reversed by certain pharmaceutical products, which are very similar to aspirin. They're called cyclooxygenase 1 inhibitors, COX-1 inhibitors. Aspirin is a COX-1 inhibitor. So are the other products. Interestingly enough, there are foods that are also COX-1 inhibitors. They act like pharmaceutical products. And one of them is curry, curcumin. It does have the same properties. So there may be some advantages to the Indian cuisine using curry in reducing the risk of colon cancer for the same principle that aspirin works. So in summary, and I will be ending in just a few moments, you can save about 100,000 lives each year by screening, but I want to emphasize it's not just colorectal cancer, cervical and breast cancer. When it comes to screening colorectal cancer, my first choice is the FIT test, fecal immunochemical test. Real easy to do, inexpensive. You should be doing this once a year, beginning no later than age 45 and going every year. Some people say stop screening at age 75 and 85. I disagree with that. I say stop screening about 10 years before you plan on dying, or when you know you're going to die. Because people in their 90s are vibrant and active. People in their centenarians are vibrant and active. As long as you have at least 10 years of lifespan ahead of you, why not protect that life? Cologuard is another great idea. It does include a FIT test within it. It adds to the DNA test. It is significantly more expensive. It runs around $500 to $650. It is covered by most insurance carriers. It is covered by Medicare. If you're at average risk, it's a great test. If you're at higher risk, most people say you should go straight to colonoscopy, but I see a reason, even for that population, to consider FIT and Cologuard. This is the capsule colonoscopy you're interested in, AJ. This is what it looks like. That's a big pill, but it is swallowable. When it travels through the gut, it has a camera at both ends. It can see a polyp, but it cannot take a biopsy. It cannot remove it. For that, you do need colonoscopy. When it comes down to it, this is CT colonography, the virtual colonoscopy. It presents a 3D image generated by computers. Pretty neat. And again, it's just about as accurate as regular colonoscopy. There is exposure to X-rays. The preparation is very similar, but high-tech. They're actually looking at using computer software to clean your colon for you, to be able to identify what is poop and what is a polyp, to discriminate between the two. This is colonoscopy, where the gastroenterologist or other physician snakes a long, slender, flexible instrument into the bowel, all the way to the end of the bowel, but the colon has to be clear. This is a colonoscopy view of a polyp sitting there, the red, and the scope is having a snare pass through a channel in the instrument. It's lassoing around the polyp using electrical cautery. You can snip the polyp out and retrieve it for the pathologist to examine. There is a risk of bleeding when you cut through the polyp base, but the electrical cautery reduces the risk by about 98%. There's also risk of perforation, which is a tear in the lining of the bowel. That is the most dangerous complication. That can lead to peritonitis, and unfortunately, tragically, deaths can occur. It is not without risk, but the risk is thought to be about 3 in 1,000 will have a very significant risk. Overall risk is higher than that. It's about 1 in 100 will have some complication, but they're usually relatively minor. And I like to make fun of my own profession. It's a cartoon, again, from Dan Ferraro, my friend. He says, first they probed inside my body, then they took all my money. And the police officer is saying extraterrestrials, and the farmer is saying gastroenterologists. So colonoscopy is expensive, but it is usually covered by insurance, certainly by Medicare, as a screening modality. I'd have been here sooner if it had not been for early detection. Early detection can save lives. It really can. It's another friend of mine, Dan Reynolds, a cartoonist. This cartoon was picked up by the American Cancer Society. It's from The Wizard of Oz. The lion says, I need courage. The Tin Man, I need a heart. The straw man, I need a brain. And the witch says, I'm over 50. I need a colorectal exam. The cartoon's going to have to be updated to age 45. Colon cancer risk factors, just in summary: tobacco, obesity, diabetes, alcohol, diet, family history. The take-home points: prevent colon cancer, avoid tobacco, avoid alcohol, physical activity, maintain a healthy weight, avoid red meat, smoked and processed foods, nitrites, increase fresh fruits, vegetables. I know you're not a fan of dairy, but dairy is on the list for colon cancer protection: fish, garlic, fiber. Avoid inflammation, stress, environmental toxins. Nutrients include calcium, selenium, folate, vitamins D and E, omega-3 fatty acids. Genetics, I teasingly say, select your biological parents well. But even if you didn't select them well, even if there's a genetic history, again, the vast majority can be modified. Probiotics will be coming. Once we identify which microbes are the right ones, they will be coming. We're not there yet. Aspirin reduces your risk by 50%. Another prescribed medicine, metformin, also reduces your risk. Regular screening tests make a big difference. I like quotes. This is from Confucius: to know what you know and what you do not know. That is true knowledge. So I do know that I've given you a lot of information, but I also want to share with you there's a lot we still don't know. And again, this is a cartoon. Give it to me straight, Doc. How long do I have to ignore your advice? I hope you have a very long time to ignore my advice. But if you're in that 5% who's going to get colon cancer, you don't have much time at all. So ignorance is the absence of knowledge. Stupidity is the presence of knowledge and the refusal to use it. So difference between information, data, and wisdom: knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Botanically, it is a fruit. AJ, I know you've mentioned before, tomatoes are fruits, as are eggplants, cucumbers, and it's great to know that. That's knowledge, that's data, that's information. Wisdom is a higher level. Knowing not to put the tomato in a fruit salad, that's wisdom. So I hope that the knowledge I've given you will lead to wisdom and you protect yourself. So the Dalai Lama, when asked what surprised him most about humanity, answered man, because he sacrifices his health in order to make money. Then he sacrifices money to recuperate his health. And then he is so anxious about the future, he does not enjoy the present, the result being that he does not live in the present or the future. He lives that he is never going to die, and then dies having never really lived. So prevention versus awareness, knowing about cancer is important, but now we really have to do something about it. Nancy, Danielle, and I have written a book all about colon cancer prevention. You can look at our website if you have an interest of other books as well. It's just important to recognize that there are so many different ways to get screened for colon cancer. I would really encourage you, please get screened. Save your life and the life of a friend or family member and the younger population as well. So I'm going to stop share here and bring us back to the big screen. And thank you for listening in.
Are you kidding, Dr. Weiss? I don't know if you can see the chat, but people saying this is one of the most engaging shows ever. People are really commenting. They love your voice. You have a very soothing, calm voice too.
Oh, thank you. I wish my voice were a bit better. And I don't mean to be, I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this. I have a much better voice than you're hearing when it's not as hoarse after all the programs I've been giving. By the way, I like to share my strange sense of humor. And I have the most degree of humility, empathy, and compassion for patients of any physician you'll ever meet. A friend of mine, Dan Reynolds, made a cartoon making fun of me, but then I teased him. I said, I'm only saying this in jest because there is a saying, and the saying is, and I like this one, I'm borrowing from someone else. I used to be conceited, as I'm talking about how much empathy and compassion I have. I used to be conceited, but now I'm perfect. So that's my strange sense of humor coming through.
Well, I love the sprinkling of the cartoons. That could be a book in itself, just the wonderful cartoons.
Well, that's what we've done in all of our books. So we do have cartoons. We have another 20 books that we've co-authored with a world-class, nationally syndicated cartoonist, Dan Reynolds. We have about 20 other books loaded with cartoons and trivia. I'm passionate about knowledge and sharing information. There's still so much I'm learning. I may have an official title of professor and professional speaker. But the way I think of myself, I consider myself a student, and I love being a student. I'm still learning. And I have to say, AJ, I've learned so much from you and the guests you've had on your shows. It's just a wealth of information. And I really thank you for offering that to all of us. We're all benefiting from that. And again, I'm a bit of a contrarian. I recognize my limits. And when I don't know something, I like to say, I don't know. I'm happy to plead my ignorance when I don't know.
I love my favorite cartoon, I think, was the one, do you want to exercise an hour a day or be dead 24 hours a day? That is hilarious.
Yeah, that is a great one. That's what
And thank you for mentioning smoke. I just cannot believe in this day and age that anyone still smokes. However, when you had that slide up about smoking, somebody commented in the chat, well, what about smoking marijuana or vaping? Is that just as bad? I mean, I know the answer, but I'll let the doctor answer.
The answer is, unfortunately, there are risks to virtually everything we do. There are very few things that are as safe as we think they are. Activity, fitness is one of them. But when it comes to smoking, smoking is a risk. So even the vaping, as we know now, people have had complications from vaping, and we don't really understand exactly what's triggering it. It's not necessarily the nicotine or the other products and the tar, et cetera. Marijuana has its own issues, and I have nothing against the active ingredient per se, but when you're smoking, you're bringing all sorts of other pollutants into your lungs. I would really discourage that. I can't think of any foreign body you'd really want to bring into your body other than a really good, nutritious food. So if you're looking at psychoactive chemicals, they're in foods too. You know, you can get everything you need in the plant world. And why use harmful substances?
Yeah, well, addiction and vaping is just really unbelievable.
It's taken off, and it's an industry. And that's why I'm also commenting, and may offend some people, I'm sorry, but probiotics at the moment, I think of as a fad. I think we're just going too fast, too far, and they're being sold and people are consuming them. And if you have a response, very good chance it's a placebo response. By the way, there's nothing wrong with the placebo response. I actually like the placebo response. If you feel better taking a product, fantastic, continue doing so. But just realize that a lot of what's being promoted out there is being marketed for a reason. And the products are very, very effective for the companies selling them, not necessarily for the people consuming.
Right. I love all the props you gave to cruciferous vegetables. I personally love them, and I love mustard on them. So it's a win-win.
Yeah, the trick is I tried contacting the manufacturer of one of our most popular mustards, and I won't mention the brand name. I asked them about the myrosinase activity in their mustard. Can we use that on our cruciferous vegetables? And they said they can't answer the question. But I did find out that they use steam sterilization, pasteurization of their mustard, which means that their myrosinase has been inactivated. So be careful about the commercial mustards. You may think I'm using mustard, I'm getting the myrosinate. You're not. So use mustard seed, ground mustard seed, go again to the natural product, go back to the foods, the whole foods. And sometimes the chemicals that we think we're getting, we're not when we're getting them in pill form from pharmacy, supermarket, Costco, whatever. If you're taking certain nutrients, there is a big difference between the nutrient in a capsule or pill or getting it in the whole food. You really need to look at the whole food as the real source.
You mentioned that polyps, that there's foods and drugs that may get rid of polyps. And Susan, who's watching live, has a question. In my case, I had a really terrible vegan diet for the first 26 years. And when I had, it wasn't even a colonoscopy, it was a sigmoidoscopy. They found several precancerous polyps, but they couldn't remove them, not because I didn't do a good job on the prep, just because things were not good down there. And that's when I really cleaned up my diet to whole foods, nothing processed. And then 6 months later in the repeat sigmoidoscopy, the polyps were gone. And the doctor said that was impossible. So what mechanism occurred for them to disappear?
No, it is possible. And the way we understand it today, there is a theory, and there's a lot of science supporting the theory, but it's not 100% conclusive, is that the majority of cancers begin as a polyp. It begins as an abnormal cell. The thought is that it's a series of mutations based on the genes within the lining of the colon, within the colon cells. When one mutation occurs, it takes a second mutation. When that second mutation occurs, now you're going to start seeing some changes in the cell types. It's called atypia. Then a third mutation occurs. Now it's moved from atypia to what's called dysplasia. Then another mutation occurs. It's thought that colon cancer takes about 12 separate mutations to get all the way to colon cancer. Now, when a mutation occurs, it is possible to block the consequences of that mutation. Sometimes it's another mutation that blocks the pathway to the changes that lead to cancer. So it is possible that you are being exposed to not only foods that have chemicals within them, and the plant-based foods, or we know them as phytochemicals, but here's something else to keep in mind. And I suspect that most of your audience may not be familiar with this. If they're like me, we went to school, we learned about genetics, you believe you inherit your genes from your parents. That's called vertical transmission. That is true. We do inherit genes from our parents and grandparents, etc. But there's another way of inheritance that was discovered in the 1980s. It was Dr. Barbara McClintock who discovered this. She called them jumping genes. She was working on corn. She's a PhD scientist. At age 81, she received a Nobel Prize in Medicine for her discovery of jumping genes, the horizontal transfer of genes. We can be influenced by the genes in our food, as well as the genes of the microbiome. Every food we eat, every food has thousands of genes. These may induce additional mutations, and they may correct the mutations that led to the cancer of polyp formation. I did mention curcumin, curry, basically has the possibility of reducing or shrinking and eliminating polyps because of its action, and one action we do know of, the cyclooxygenase 1 pathway. So much like aspirin or the other non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs that can reduce colon polyps or cause colon polyps to disappear, it is absolutely possible for your diet to make a difference in colon polyps, and you certainly wouldn't want them to regress and disappear. So it's not unheard of, and I suspect we're going to learn more and more about the importance of these products in years to come. And much like aspirin is available, readily available, curry is readily available. You can go to your kitchen and may have benefits.
Wow. Well, before I ask you the final question, I want to thank Violet Rodriguez for the super chat donation. People are asking, I know you live in San Diego. Are you currently taking patients? Do you do any kind of telemedicine? And how can people stay in touch with you, follow you, that kind of thing?
Well, I have a very, very limited concierge type of consultation practice, and it's really limited. I'm not encouraging people to contact me. If they really feel desperate, they need to reach me. You can. I put up on the image before my website, which is www.smartaskbooks.com. SMARTBOOKS. Smart Ask, not the other thing you think you're hearing, .com. Smartaskbooks.com, because I write books that have a bit of humor, but a ton of information. If you go to the website, there's a lot of information. They can also reach me, and again, I don't mean to hold up the book to share with you, but it is on Amazon as well. It's probably backwards on the camera.
No, it looks right. And I actually have been posting the link where they can get it.
So get the book. The book has got a ton of information, much more than I can talk about. Again, I am a contrarian. I don't think the way everyone else in my field does. I think we have a lot to learn yet. I like to borrow from others. Wherever I can find knowledge, that's where I want to get it. I'm going to take it and use it and share it with others. So you can reach me through the website, and it has an email link there as well. So I'm not really encouraging people to reach me to see me as their doctor, but if they're really desperate, we can talk about that. I can do telemedicine. But for the most part, I am so busy giving talks and lectures and other things. I wish I had the time for the individuals, but I really am compassionate. I do have empathy. So if somebody really needs me, I will make the effort to reach out to them.
Or they can just come to Rancho La Puerta the week
Absolutely.
of August 14th. We'll both be there and we'll have dinner with them.
We would enjoy that. The other thing which I do at Rancho La Puerta is we do offer curbsides with me, where we can spend an hour talking about their health issues. I do that at the ranch, and I enjoy that. So again, I will not be your treating physician, but you can certainly pick my brain. And I have to say, I do know an awful lot, but there's a lot more that I don't know. And I'll share that with you as well.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to that capsule. I'd like to broadcast it everywhere if I could do that. I really would. I'd love to have it broadcast live. I think that'd be fun, seeing my guts.
You could be the Katie Couric of capsule colonoscopy. There you go.
I would love to do it. And then if somebody says, I hate your guts, I'm like, okay.
But by the way, you know that capsule is recording 24 hours or close to it. It's a very long, but they speed up the tape. The poor doctor has to review it, and I've done these, can spend hours, but you speed up the tape to look just for the things you really need to see. So we can even make and have some snapshot wallet-sized photos for you to hand out when you have your celebrity signings of photographs.
Oh, sign me up, because that sounds great. This was just really, it so far exceeded my expectations. You're a wonderful presenter, and this was a wonderful presentation that we're going to have to watch again just to glean all the nuggets. Thank you so much, Dr. Weiss.
My pleasure, AJ, and I hope I get to come back. There's so much more information I'd love to share with you and the audience, but thank you for your programs and what you offer everyone. It really is a delight to be here. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. If you come back in 90 minutes, I have a bonus show today with a wonderful athlete named Izzy Fisher, who created something called Plant Bites that I'm going to be tasting on the air. Thanks again, Dr. Weiss.